Gwendolyn Ranger Wormser was born in 1893 and lived in New York. Not to be confused with Gwendolyn Wormser from New York, who married Lyman G. Bloomingdale, grandson of Lyman Gustav Bloomingdale, who founded Bloomingdale Department Store in 1946. She instead married H. Randolph Guggenheimer, presumably Harry Randolph Guggenheimer, born in 1879, also in New York. The marriage took place around 1919, after Guggenheimer divorced his first wife, Janet Beecher, following the court granting Beecher an alimony of $2,500 per year. One would not expect the name Gwendolyn R. Wormser to be as ubiquitous, but as it stands, this is all the biographical information I was able to find out about Wormser's life, apart from her death having supposedly occurred in 1953. In 1918, she published The Scarecrow and Other Stories, and the only other publication by Wormser beyond a few short stories published in magazines around this time was the privately printed pamphlet Abram Goody, a story of a man, quote, waxing mighty and powerful among his fellows of the village, but being unable to woo the woman of his choice. Perhaps the introduction to the expanded collection of The Scarecrow from 2001 by Midnight House might include more information about Wormser, but given the low print run of the title, I could not get my hands on it. This collection is certainly very exceptional. Wormser's fiction here was compared to Algernon Blackwood by Edward J. O'Brien, who in his The Best Short Stories of 1918 wrote that these stories are subtle studies of unfamiliar regions of the spirit. O'Brien concluded his praise of Wormser by stating that, "I believe this volume heralds a remarkable future." Sadly, this was not the case, as beyond a handful of magazine stories and that one other pamphlet previously mentioned, it apparently was the only notable thing Wormser ever published. To go over the stories in this volume, Ben is the story of a small child living a horribly dull existence on a farm, where he is continuously fascinated by a scarecrow wearing his grandfather's old military uniform, which sways its arms back and forth as if beckoning him off to go off somewhere. And Ben is unable to resist it, saying that if it ever truly beckons to him, he'll just have to go, despite the protestations of his mother that it's just the wind that makes the scarecrow move. In Mutterschwegel, a British and German friend meet after World War I and reminisce about how they were afraid of hurting each other during the war in their student days, but there is another reason for why Otto came to the house, which he won't openly disclose. Haunted is a great story of a man washed up on the shore without any memory of his past, who lives alone and shunned by the local fishermen, and whose entire life is overshadowed by the sinister and dominating presence of the sea, presented as a great, sentient, malignant entity. Flowers, meanwhile, narrates the story of a man who visits a woman in his dreams, a woman very much obsessed with flowers, something that the man does not really take to, but who is unable to find her in the waking world. A much lighter story in tone, it is reminiscent of the more positive tales of Algernon Blackwood. The Shadow is a comeuppance story of a vain husband who gets puffed up because he thinks he is a genius, not knowing the real source of the startlingly popular, deep books he writes, due to, quote-unquote, the inspiration granted to him whenever he looks at a shadow cast on the window of the adjacent house. It is also the first story in the collection which focuses partially on domestic abuse, which seems to be a running theme in Wormser's stories. The effigy gives us a similar tone, a woman whose domineering father forces her to marry, yet who finds a strange way to get revenge against him, using his old portrait. Faith, meanwhile, narrates how a fortune-teller has to come to terms with her son going off to war, despite knowing that he very well might get killed. In Yellow, we have a man from China trying to become truly American in his mood and way of thinking, but is unable to stop everyone from treating him in a really racist way and as a simple stereotypical Chinaman. In China Ching, we have another abused wife who rises up against her tyrannical husband by trying to free a strange, ragged dog he had trapped in his kennels. The Wood of the Living Trees is a story of reincarnation, where a man avenges the death of his lot from a previous life by hunting down the evil force that brought her to her death in the Wood of the Living Trees. Before the dawn has two soldiers meet up in total darkness, and then lying down together until morning in the shadow of a ravaged cross in the countryside ravaged by war. And finally, The Stillness relates the agony of a man who was exiled from society due to an unspecified wrong he had committed, and who is dying spiritually from the absolute all-encompassing stillness and oppressive quiet of the abandoned farm where he had to go and live. This is a very promising collection, and it is really sad that Wormser apparently never wrote anything ever again.